American exceptionalism. Some people believe it, some people don't. But what does American exceptionalism mean? The goal of my journey is to get past the buzzword and explore, what does American exceptionalism really mean? I'm Janine Turner. Join me as I speak with scholars and Americans all across the United States about what American exceptionalism means to them, both historically and currently. American exceptionalism, how and why it matters. We have a fabulous guest with us today, Jay McConville. He is a military veteran, a very successful businessman, and is getting his doctorate in public policy, almost finished. And most importantly, for us at least, he is a board member of Constituting America. He's a very patient man. We are lucky to have him on the board. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's exciting to be here. Yeah.
Well, you helped make this happen, so.
Always a pleasure. Anything for Constituting America, right?
He says, oh, it's always a pleasure. Mostly a pleasure.
Mostly a pleasure. No, it always is.
It's hard work being on the board.
It's good, but it's very, very rewarding to see all the work that gets done. I had the opportunity to go on the school trip or the winter trip the other year, and it was just fantastic to see. So it's very much worth it.
Well, we thank you so much, genuinely. And we're thrilled that you're here. You're getting your doctorate in public policy, which is very exciting.
Yes.
And you've written many articles for us. So today we're going to talk about the Communist Manifesto and how that juxtapositions with American exceptionalism, because the show's American exceptionalism revealed how and why.
Right.
So that when someone has a conversation, they say, oh, America's not exceptional. And we go, but it is. Well, how? Well, this is giving the tools in the toolbox to really understand. Because at Jay, as you know, as a board member, we have our 90-day studies. 90 plus 90 equals 180. History holds the key to the future. And we were talking about yesterday, it's a great Shakespearean line, the past is the prologue. Yeah. And we saw it on the statue outside of the National Archives, so we stopped. But the past really is our prologue to understand. And we don't have enough of that in history. We don't have enough of that in our cultural discussion. So here we are.
Right.
And you wrote a wonderful essay about the Communist Manifesto, talking about how we have not fallen into these same traps. That's why I designed this study, because I thought, wow, this is exceptional. We're not perfect by any means of the imagination, but we have not fallen into a Napoleon or a Stalin. So far so good. We haven't fallen into Greece or Rome that they studied. But if you go throughout the whole history here, that this is the 240 years, 47 years, we haven't fallen into these traps of communism and or dictatorship or monarchy. Tyranny. So talk to us about your thoughts on this. And I think it's interesting for our listeners to really understand, what was the Communist Manifesto?
Okay, so I approached it as a comparison, really, to our founding documents. And so I looked at how the vision and mission of states that adopted communism or communistic or socialistic underlying concept for their government, how they would progress based on the vision that was set in that document. Now, the document itself was, Karl Marx and Engels, and they had put this document together as a manifesto, in other words, to describe their vision for where they thought communism was taking the world and how it would progress and really become the dominant system around the world, and why. So that's what the Communist Manifesto is. It's interesting, in my article, I note that Engels based a lot of that on his experiences with early Industrial Revolution business, which was admittedly very difficult as the society changed. There was a lot of turmoil. There were very poor working conditions in a lot of cases, and he saw some of that. And that is reflected in the document. And of course, Karl Marx was more the theoretician and tried to put that in the context of how it would progress across the globe. But it's been said of the Communist Manifesto that it really was just a document for its time. It's very hard to imagine it having been ever written in any other period of time. It was really based on this turmoil of the Industrial Revolution and the changes that were happening in Europe, the fall of the aristocracy, the change in serfdom and the rise of people, what was going to happen. So anyway,
and
that
they were
was
in
the
Germany.
document.
They were in Germany.
Germany, and yes.
Were they German?
Yes, Engels and Marx, I
So
think.
they weren't. But so were they hoping that this would evolve in Germany?
It was a worldwide
because
movement.
Russia really took it under their belt.
That happened later. So it was translated into many, many languages, and
they were philosophers.
They were certainly Marx was a philosopher, very unsuccessful one, by the way.
Yeah, he was poor. He was very poor in a dark room.
Very unhappy, and that I think that comes out in the document. As I mentioned, Engels he based it more on experience.
Would we say that Marx was an atheist?
Yes.
Okay.
And not only an atheist, but anti-religion. Right. So but again, that reflected in just a few decades time period of really a struggle that was happening when the modernization of society. And you can imagine the turmoil that was happening. And they tried to put together a vision, so to speak, for where that would lead. But it was a very dark document, as opposed to our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, which were much more positive in nature and set a vision for us to progress, as we say in our documents, to a more perfect union. Didn't claim that we were perfect and set up, but we were progressing to a more perfect union. So I compared those two. So the Communist Manifesto really did set a very dark vision, and of course we know the result. As I mentioned, it was translated into a lot of different languages. I'm sure that Marx had vision that it would dominate the world, and he thought that it would be the industrialized nations like Great Britain and the United States who would adopt that. But it took hold in Russia in their revolution, 1917. It took hold there as their underlying government concept, communism, and we see the result.
And what was, if you were to 1, 2, 3, 4, what was it? I mean, we have such structure in our documents. We have 3 branches of government. It's a Republican, it's federalist. The states still have their own powers. They have to have their own constitutions, and we're going to have checks and balances. And so what was the outline of the Communist Manifesto?
It wasn't like that. We remember going back to the Soviet Union days. I'm old enough to remember the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I am too.
They had a constitution, and if you read it, it sounded good. I mean, there were concepts there I don't obviously agree with, but they had a structure of government in it. That was not what the Communist Manifesto provided. What it provided was a concept, really, a vision for how we overcome the negativities of the world, this struggle of class between the rich and the poor.
And how did they say we do this?
By defeating the rich, by taking everything from them, by abolishing property, abolishing religion, abolishing liberty, honestly. And that was where the darkness in the document was. It was a we versus them document. It was the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, and we had to destroy the other. And the method of destroying the other was government, and it was going to be violent. That's acknowledged in the document, and it is going to be a struggle, and we're going to take people's rights away, and we're going to take their property away. This is all right in there. It's very, very dark.
Interesting. Yeah. I confess, I'm a reader, but I have not read this. Yeah. We're going to take people's rights, property and rights away, and also that it's going to be violent. They talk about that?
Yeah, that by necessity, it will be a struggle that will include
whereas
violence.
We say you may assemble peacefully.
Yeah. Yeah, it was not a peaceful document. My assessment of it, and I'm not an expert in the Communist Manifesto, but reading through it, what I get out of it is the foundation of a philosophy of resentment and envy. And those dark emotions lead only to what was really predicted in the document, which is violence and tyranny and oppression. That's the vision of the document in my view. Now, some would say, well, it laid out, which it did, it's long, it's hard to read, it laid out in detail a lot of negativity, a lot of aspects of the society that were unfair, and there were struggles, and the serfs who were now coming into becoming factory workers, they were oppressed, right? So there was certainly an underlying truth to the struggle, but the solution to that, as opposed to our founding documents, the solution was negative. What would take us down a path of tyranny.
And what was the solution?
The solution, again, was class warfare, the defeat of the other, the taking of property. And the vision ultimately was there would be no property. So this propertyless utopia would emerge. But to get there, as Stalin, I think it was, who famously said, to make an omelet you have to break a lot of eggs. So to get there was going to be a struggle, and it was going to be really tough.
It just goes against human nature.
I think so. Well, maybe I'll disagree with you on that.
Really?
I think it fed off some aspects of human nature.
But everybody doesn't really want to be the same. I mean, they do, but they don't.
That certainly no.
I mean, in that regard, the human nature, we have a tendency to compete and to dream and to want to aspire. And if you create something, you want to be proud of it and own it. And so I think that a lot of what they were trying to do was against the innate qualities.
Yeah, I think it's Norman Podhurst, he mentioned that, when we talk about American exceptionalism, people often say, well, we're not exceptional because we're not all equal. Like, we don't have equity, and everybody's not the same. And his comment to that was, well, because that fails to account for all those human qualities that you just pointed out, ability and drive and ambition, and people are not the same in that regard, and so the end results will end up being different. But in the communist vision, that was unacceptable. We all had to be the same. We had to make the same amount of money. We had the same resources available. We had to live the same. And it just wasn't achievable.
And they told them how to write their music and what to write, what they could and could not say. Nobody was really seen as an individual. There was no individual liberty.
No.
That's
individual liberty,
too,
and that's
right?
in the document too, is sacrificed for the good of the whole. And the good of the whole was envisioned as this utopian equality that, and not even equality, equity, everybody would have the same, not achievable. But what you're mentioning...
Because we're not robots.
We're not. And so what that requires, to try to even get down that path, it requires a top-down use of power that is so restrictive. And that's what you mentioned. Yes, you had to propagandize the population constantly. You had to control their movement. You couldn't allow for individuality because it would expose the lie of the society. As there's the famous quote, I don't know who said it, in the Soviet Union, the workers pretended to work, and the government pretended to pay them. It was all a lie, because you had to keep the lie going in order to, force this vision on the society.
It's like if you have two children, one's going to be different than the other. One's
Absolutely.
going to want to do something different than the other.
Thomas Sowell is famous for saying that. Thomas Sowell from Columbia, now the Hoover Institute, he says, you can't even have equality in one family. How are you going to have it across, this large heterogeneous population?
I think about people saying that we should have equal outcomes all the time.
Yeah.
And I don't have an equal outcome in my business.
No.
I mean, Julia Roberts, who I think is fabulous, right? She arrived, immediately made it, is making millions and millions of dollars for a movie, and I'm an actress, and that took me 12 years to get there, and
right.
and now we're at different places, and so it's weird to think, well, I deserve what Julia Roberts gets.
Right.
Well, Julia Roberts, or let's say Jennifer Aniston. Jennifer Aniston made very different decisions with her life than I did.
Sure.
So I took years off with my daughter and launched Constituting America, and I had other things I wanted to do. But if I were to sit here now and say, well, I deserve what Jennifer Aniston has. Well, Jennifer Aniston has dedicated her all these years to nothing but Hollywood. You know what I mean? We've had different tracks. So this whole concept that every outcome should be the same when we're so uniquely different is a weird conversation. It's like, on the one hand, we want to be unique and we want to do our own thing, but then we all want to have the same outcome. And that's just not possible.
It's not possible to achieve it. It's also not possible to have success when you have that as the underlying concept, because some people will say, well, why should I do all the sacrifices that I have to do in order to achieve great things if I'm not going to get any benefit out of that? I'm going to have the same as somebody else. And I think
that's what happened in the communism. That's why everybody was so despondent and drank and sat back. It's like, what's the use?
Right.
I can achieve something, but it's not going to get me anywhere. And so there was no hope, no inspiration.
I think it's been shown that if you look at nations that have gone down a socialist, communist route, there's initially a bump in creativity, arts, technology, even industry, a little less so, because the people who were not raised under a communist regime suddenly get funded, right? And they get kind of successful for a short period of time, but then that fades because people grow up in the system and they kind of lose that drive that we will all need in order to have exceptional success. You know? So where you're going to go with your life is really up to you. I know from personal experience, I was a business guy. I decided not to keep going. You know, I'd been a CEO, and I'm still relatively young, but you know, I didn't want to keep working 80 hours a week, so I did something different. That was my choice, right? I didn't expect that I would have the same thing as somebody who made a different choice. And that goes all through society. We acknowledge that liberty here, but in the Communist Manifesto, that was not going to be permissible because the state had to control everything in order to force equality on the society.
It was dark in its genesis, and it was dark in its result.
Yeah, I would say that Karl Marx, and I don't want to psychoanalyze someone who's long dead and I've never met, but was a very, very unhappy person. Really felt, and this is not me, others have said this, really felt that he was brilliant in his own mind and had not had the kind of success he should have had. And it, I think, led just to resentment, which is, again, the underlying theme of the document. And you mentioned before human nature. That's where I was going with that. Unfortunately, humans do have a tendency to resent people who have more than them. And we have to fight that. And this document appealed to that, very much so. The whole movement appealed to that. Whereas our founding documents set a much different vision, which I think goes to exceptionalism. You know, why were we different and made such an impact? There was a lot of reasons, but it started with the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, especially the vision and mission statement that were contained in them.
And how were they different? How would you say they were so different?
Well, you know, I think this was Norman Potthurst again. I'll use his structure. There was really three main things that came out, but then I added a little bit to it. So one, it was based on the proposition, you know, that this was self-evident that all men are created equal. At the time, no society felt that. Now, we tend to think, oh, well, we didn't do it right back then. Forget that this was a long time ago, and because, in a large part, because of the United States, that concept has spread. So we're not as unique in holding that concept anymore, and that's a good thing. You know, we've helped spread that. But back then, that was unique. So what's exceptional?
God gave us our right as a king, didn't give it to us as a government.
Well, that was another. So all men are created equal. You could be part of the American experiment, but by just becoming part of it. You didn't have to be born into it. You didn't have to own land in it. You know, you could be an immigrant. You could come to the American experiment, pledge allegiance to our underlying concepts, and you could be an American. You know, I can never be an Italian. And I love Italy, but I can never be an Italian. But anybody could be an American, so that's two. And then third is what you say there. Yes, we were endowed by our Creator with these certain inalienable rights. They did not come from kings or parliaments, and so they could not be taken away by kings or parliaments or an aristocracy or anyone else. They were our rights. We were individually sovereign, which was, in those days, a absolutely earth-shattering concept to spread into a large nation.
I like the way you just put that, individually sovereign.
Yes.
I like that a lot. And individuality is a big part of being an American. And I think that what we need to make sure we have is a continual debate and deliberation in that respect. It's because we are all individuals. We shouldn't expect everybody to be the same. But individual sovereignty there's popular sovereignty as a country, but individual sovereignty, really, yeah, I like that.
Well, if we are all endowed by our Creator, that means each human being has those qualities in them. They are a sovereign unto themselves because they are, you know, as I, as a Christian, would say, a child of God. So you are as worthy of being human and being alive as anyone else, and they are as of you. So that individual sovereignty, I'm responsible for myself, but I'm I'm the only one who really rules over that part of me other than God.
And it took us a long time to perfect that, and I would say we're still trying to perfect that, but the promise was there.
Yes. I think that if we can look at why some people do doubt the term American exceptionalism, I'm in university, and if I say that in a class, which I have, you get some pushback on that, right? I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is what you just mentioned. I think it carries with it this notion that we are superior. But that's not what exceptionalism means. You might be superior, but that's not what the word means. The word means different, right? And different usually in a positive connotation. And certainly in 1776 and 85 and 87, we were different, certainly as an American nation. We were exceptional in that we were different in a positive way in providing these three things I just mentioned. The second reason is that people forget that right there in the vision statement, it says to create a more perfect union. There was no claim made in our founding documents that we were a perfect union. Now, the Constitution has right in it the Bill of Rights, right? It was, here's the Constitution, but here's the other things we need to really look out for. And it has an ability to amend it. And then the power goes to the people to do that. That shows you right up front that the founding intellect of that time acknowledged that we were not yet the perfect union.
I really respond to what you just said about a more perfect union. Just say that one more time, because I think it was really good.
Yes. So there was no expectation.
We didn't say we were a perfect union.
No, there was no claim to that. And I believe some people can sometimes be cynical and say the United States had this problem and that problem. And we certainly did. We had slavery. We had women's rights issues. We had treatment of foreigners that was certainly not perfect, right?
Native American rights.
Lots, of course. Lots of other things. Lots of other things.
Yeah, right.
But there was no claim at the time of our founding that we were a perfect union. What there was a vision that we would create a more perfect union, which talks to progress, not perfection. And that's a really important concept. But if you look at it cynically, you could say, oh, well, we had slavery, so therefore the entire American experiment is a lie. Well, that's not true, right? Because we did make progress. We absolutely did make progress. Compare that again to the communist vision. What was the result of that? You go down the street here in Washington, D.C. to the Museum of Communism, and you'll see 100 million dead. In 100 years. What was the result of our vision? The spreading of this notion around the world that all men are created equal. It was not a concept widely accepted in 1776. It is a concept widely accepted today. How come? Well, not fully, not 100%, but largely because of the United States and the vision and mission set forth in our founding documents, which spread around the world.
And the hope there within.
Yes, it's a hopeful vision. It's a hopeful vision.
I like what you talk about. You talk about the vision. It's sort of like a mission statement.
Yes. Well, I was a business guy.
Yeah.
You
don't do mission statement, but 501c3s, you have a mission statement.
Yes, we do that.
So right. This is the vision statement and the mission statement. This is what we set out to do.
Yes.
This is what's wrong. This is what we're trying to fix. And as you say, it'll be progress, not perfection, but this is the foundation of what we're trying to do. Right. And it was unique to the time. And I think we forget that it could have gone the other way.
Absolutely.
I mean, this was the most powerful nation in the world, England. We didn't even have a navy.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't even have matching uniforms. We didn't even have a real unity of a nation,
right,
which George Washington had to do. And when those men stood up and said, here is this vision for, as you beautifully say, of a more perfect union, they didn't know that they weren't all going to get hung. What was it? Benjamin Franklin says we hang together, or we almost surely will all hang separately.
Yeah. And actually a lot of them did.
Yeah.
A lot of the founding
lost everything.
Fathers, they lost everything in that quest. Yeah, I was a business person. I was in business for a lot of years after I got out of the military, and we would always set the vision for the organization. And no good business person, you don't get to be CEO by describing what your company is. You get to be CEO or a strategy professional or something, like that, executive, by describing where your company is headed and how you're going to get there. That's vision and mission, right? You set your objectives, your goals, and your processes for getting there. So in the preamble to the Constitution, for example, which is like the perfect mission statement, right? Right. It is, right? I mean, who is it?
Gouverneur Morris.
If you could do that in your company, you'd be set, right?
Gouverneur Morris put that together.
Yeah,
they said, here's what we wrote. Now go write a mission statement.
That's perfect, right? So how are we going to do it? We're going to establish justice, right? We're going to promote the general welfare. We're going to provide for the common defense. These are action words, that are right there.
Right.
And shows what we're going to be, a more perfect union. That's where we're headed, and here's how we're going to do it. So it was really a very, very positive document as opposed to the manifesto.
And our documents gave us really specific checks against tyranny of power.
Yes.
That would allow this American ingenuity and individualistic sovereignty to flourish.
Yes.
Because otherwise, if we don't have those checks and balances and the government, someone becomes too powerful, we'll fall to tyranny.
Right.
I think that's been one of the most remarkable aspects of and why they are exceptional of our founding documents, is that we have managed to do that.
Yes. So far, in our progress here. We could talk about another essay I wrote.
Right. But we have not fallen into Napoleon, the horrors of communism. We always feel, I think every generation probably, I think about that. They probably said, oh, the telephone, Yep. No one's ever going to sit and talk together anymore. And it's like, oh, the car, no one's ever going to walk anymore. So every generation probably has their fears of where we're going. Now, of course, it's AI, what in the world's going to happen there. Yeah. But we haven't, at least at this point, fallen into some of these real terrors as far as communism's concerned and Napoleon's concerned and another dictator or anarchy.
Or anarchy, the other flip side of it. Yeah, I think it goes back to that ingraining those concepts in the populace, right? So it's hard to imagine the United States slipping into tyranny. I mean, I worry about it. We all do. But why is that hard to imagine? Because there's a feeling amongst American citizens that they are the sovereign. It is we the people. The checks and balances that we have in our government are set to check the power expansion of any of the different branches, right? But really what they are is to control the government in general. I think it was Madison who said the first task we have to do is control the people, and then we have to control the government, right? Yes. So you have to control itself. So we control the expansion of that because we have this notion that it's we the people, we're in charge. We're the sovereign. I'm sovereign over myself, and we're sovereign over this nation. It was founded on us. So the government has its role, and that role is limited because it is not the ultimate sovereign over the people. The people are.
Yeah. And that was my debate that I had recently on Constitutional Chats, which is I don't think we would have ever, even in 1789, resorted to a king. Because even though there was kind of like, is George Washington going to be a king? But I think that was already there. Yeah. It was already sort of like, wait, we get our rights from God, and we don't get it. We are created by God. I think that would have been a rough sell even then. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. I agree. I mean, you look at George Washington during the conduct of the war, and all he had to do to appeal to the states to just help him at all, constantly promising that it was not going to turn into this this tyranny, and that their rights would be continually respected because it was diffused. And that was the point, right? The states didn't, initially want to really be absorbed into some big federal regime. That was the going in proposition that they would not be. So to say that we would then default to a king right away,
wouldn't have worked.
I don't think it would have worked. Probably what happened, if you're guessing, would have broke up. You know, so it would have been multiple small nations, probably a lot of warfare, a lot of infighting, and that kind of thing. So,
and the Common Sense by Thomas Paine was sort of the most popular book at the time, and it was definitely the days of kings are over.
Right.
You know, so I think that would have been a rough sell. Well, that's good to know that, and yeah, our danger may just be being overtaken in some sort of AI way or something that we have to stay in step with our enemies. But good. I'm glad to hear that you feel good about the fact that tyranny may never happen here. But that means that the work in progress that we are with our vision statement has, and I think all the people that are immigrating here today still want that promise.
That's why they come here.
Yeah, but they did not have it in Russia or or you could argue that in China they don't have that. I did a movie in communist China in 1982, 83, and one of the actors had lived through the Cultural Revolution and told me about the horrors of what it was like over there. Right. I was really young, and I had learned firsthand. And I experienced what it was like in a communist country at the time. But, and you know, you have North Korea. When I speak with the students, I say, we can't take this for granted. There are 1.5 billion people in China, and they do not have what we have. So there's still a lot of the world that's under this kind of tyranny, and we just think, oh, the whole world's like this, you know.
Well, I think that's why I love to work with Constituting America, because the big threat, in my view, is the kind of growing sense that Americans do not appreciate that, because they don't really understand what's going on in the rest of the world now, and certainly not in the past. So there's an appreciation for history, that old salt, you know, if those who fail to know their history are doomed to repeat it. I think there's a lot to say there. And if we don't understand the exceptional nature of the United States on its founding, but also as it progressed over 247 years, because we don't know what the situation in the world was then, and we don't even really know what it is now. I'm talking about generally in the population because of lack of education on that front. Then we do slip into a situation where tyranny does raise its head. Because if we're ignorant of the underlying vision and mission, then we lose that sense that we are sovereign. That would be my biggest fear, other than financial fears, which is a whole separate issue, is that we lose that idea of American exceptionalism, which again is not saying that we're morally superior and better than other people or other nations. It's saying that we're different in a positive way, and we have something different and unique to offer, which we definitely do. If we lose that sense, then I would say that we would be at risk.
And also what you're saying about the individual sovereignty, if we start thinking the government's doing everything for us.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's go back to, in wrapping up here with the communism.
Yeah.
And that they were saying the government's going to do it all for you.
Absolutely.
You're going to do what we say. So we are sovereign, the government's sovereign, you're going to do what we say, and whereas here it was different.
Yeah.
But in Russia, there was no popular sovereignty, there was no individualistic sovereignty. It was the government's going to tell.
It was power.
Yeah, and that is what I'm worried about in America, is that we rely on the government too much. Well, the government should fix that. Where in the beginning, it was we will fix it.
Right.
You know, I will fix it. The community will fix it. The community, you know, the charitable organizations, the church. We didn't always knee-jerk reaction first to the government, and I think, in a way, we're saying the government's sovereign if we do that.
Yes, we cede our power over ourselves to the government more and more and more and more, and eventually you think you would trip the line where you are no longer sovereign, where we the people are not really sovereign. There's concerns that, you know, we may have approached that line very, very closely. And I don't know about that, but I know we don't want to do that.
No.
In the Soviet Union, in Russia, the default was the state was the power. That's where the power was. It was in the state. Now, they did say in the Communist Manifesto, the ultimate objective was there would be no state. You know, there was this utopian notion that we would all just be in a commune and everybody would just help, and from each according to his abilities and to each according to their needs. That that notion never happened. And the reason, one of the reasons, is because when you cede that kind of power to the state because you feel that it's necessary in order to get this step done, right? We have to give all the power to the state because we want to achieve our utopia, but we'll never get there unless we do. Cede all of our power to the state. The state will never relinquish that power. And that has been proven by history.
Right, because men are not angels.
Men are not angels. There you go, right? Right. So that's why we have restrictions on government, because power will beget more power, and it will accumulate more power, and it will never give it up.
And in closing here, that's sort of interesting to me about and they also had a lack of God.
Yes.
In that society. So an accountability, a desire to lead a purpose-filled life that is of light and to help fellow mankind. But the utopia sounds so good. The utopia is like, we're almost going to live like Jesus. We're almost going to live like Buddha or Muhammad. And we're going to live like this, where we care about one another, but it's not taking into account what God knows, which is, he gives us the 10 Commandments because he sees that we kind of have this innate quality within us as well that's not really always good.
There's
so utopia really doesn't work amongst
utopia
mankind.
is basically a word
without
for
any
fake,
check.
right? It really means that never going to happen, right? It's a fake world. It's not going to happen.
And that's a danger. It's a danger, and that's why it happened. The people that were fighting in the revolution, they thought they were going to get this no state, live on the farm, we're all going to take care of each other.
There's a woman, I'm trying to remember her name, I can't remember right now, but she defected from North Korea recently, and she's been kind of making the podcast rounds, trying to kind of warn people about the nature of tyrannical regimes. And she said just the other day that this notion that men are good at heart, men and women, we're born good, we're good at heart, and our societies make us bad. She said, that's not true, because if it were true, there would be no North Korea. And she goes through the horrors of what that kind of tyrannical government does to its people. Our societies are supposed to make us better. And we have the restrictions of government and on government and that because we have to guard, because men are not angels. And we've done that well here. Whereas in the concept of the communist state, it was the vanguard of the proletariat, right? The people who will lead the proletariat to the utopian future, they need to be ceded all the power. And they will do the right things. They didn't do the right things because they won't do the right things. And this
because
notion,
we're human.
Yeah, there's this notion that communism is a good idea, it just needs to be executed correctly. It assumes
that's what they believed in the beginning. If we just get rid of all these
we'll
the
do it
bourgeois
right.
and the royalty, then it'll be fine.
Yep, they'll do it right. That assumes that your group of your vanguard is better than that other vanguard, which is a really highly dubious proposition.
So the inspiration from it, the mission statement, there's just the belief is on human nature is different.
Yeah.
About what we believe in human nature.
Absolutely.
Here, based on really, you could argue a God,
right?
And they were godless.
They had to be.
And so you have a whole different kind of foundation there.
You couldn't put God before the state. The state had to be the ultimate authority because it was going to do things to people that were going to be awful, and that was acknowledged. We're going to take your property away. Marx said that you criticize us. This is in the document. You criticize us because you say we're going to take property from people. That's exactly what we're going to do. That's not a criticism. That's the plan.
That's a fact.
Yeah, I'm not quoting him directly, but that's a fact. That's part of the plan. So don't criticize. That's not a criticism. They knew what they were going to do.
Yeah. Wow. Well, so we are exceptional here for the many reasons that you have mentioned today.
Yes.
And that's why I do like to focus on and I even like the way you described exceptionalism and what that means. Round us off with that again.
What it really means is we're different. And it's to be exceptional is to be different, and it's normally in a positive context. Right? So we're different in a positive way. And we are. The United States is. I think that's undoubtable, or what's the right word? You really can't fight that. If you look at history, back then, when we were founded, we were certainly exceptional. And the result of that exceptionality has spread around the world. And that's a good thing.
And we're working toward a more perfect union.
More perfect union. That's right.
You're awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very inspirational things today.
Good.
Jay McConville, everybody.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.